Good morning and welcome to Member Focus Monday. I'm Cristina Schaefer, Director of Social Media for HAR, and I am joined this morning by Harris County Elections Administrator Isabel Longoria. Welcome.
Hey, morning, everyone.
Thank you so much for joining us this morning. I know we have some primary elections coming up, and we've been getting flooded with questions from our members that I know you'll be able to answer, so we're really happy you could take time and join us today.
Absolutely. I love being able to just reach out to y'all directly and get you armed with all the information you need.
Very good. Before we get into some of those questions that we've been getting, if you could just tell us a little bit about who you are, what you do, and what your office is in charge of.
So I'm Isabel Longoria, the Harris County Elections Administrator. Until about a year and a half ago, elections in Harris County were run by the county clerk and voter registration was run by the tax office. A lot of historical implications there. For example, when collecting poll taxes, the tax office was the only office in a county that could collect money or had a mechanism to do so. And so there's all this history behind it. And fast forward, the commissioner said, you know what? We need to combine it into one office so it makes it easier for voters. Before that, how I arrived here is I went to school. I studied underwater archaeology, and through basically going to grad school for public affairs and stumbling into working for a representative at the Texas legislature, I fell in love with just civic engagement in politics. And fast forward, here I am. So I was appointed the first elections administrator in Harris County. Proud to serve in this position. I'm a big election nerd and nerd in general. And I can't think of any cooler project than applying all of those nerdy attributes to helping people vote.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing that story. We love hearing backstories of how people got into the position that they are in. So let's dive into it. In 2020, due to the severity of the pandemic, Harris County expanded voting access by implementing things like drive-through voting, 24-hour voting. In 2021, the state legislature enacted laws that prohibit drive-through voting in certain situations and 24-hour voting. So since we're still in the midst of the pandemic, what tools is Harris County using to make sure voters have access?
That's a tough one. Now, first and foremost, though we're several years into this pandemic, we're still implementing all of our COVID measures. We still have our election judges wipe down all of the machines in between voters. We still offer the finger cots and masks for voters who come in. We have face shields between the voters and our staff checking in. And we've tried our very, very best to pick bigger locations where those voting machines can be spaced out, just to create, all those best practices from living with COVID. We know, though, that the state of Texas prohibits us from implementing those or forcing any voter to come in wearing a mask, to come in using any of those protections. And that's fine. We are allowed to have our election workers do that, and they're all primed to keep voters safe. All that being said, we have not yet connected any kind of major outbreak or anything related to COVID to voting. It goes by pretty quickly. You're usually under that 15-minute mark. And so it doesn't feel like or seem like voters have been deterred because of that. Now, fast forwarding to the bigger provisions, you're absolutely right. In 2020, we enacted drive-through voting, which means any voter for any reason could come through any one of our drive-through locations and vote from your car. We had most often young families who said it was easy just to load the kids in the car, not worry about unloading them, get them driving. Same with older parents. If you're a caregiver like myself, easier to just put your grandparents in the car, run around, do your errands instead of having to worry about them being in the car. And it was widely used. The Texas legislature decided to make that illegal now. So there is no more drive-through voting in Harris County. Oddly enough, there is curbside voting. So this is a federal mandate that has been in place for years. It's at every single location. If you drive to any one of our voting locations, you'll see literally a curbside buzzer, a little blue button. You're only allowed to use curbside voting if you have some kind of disability or impairment that prevents you from walking into a voting location or from entering a voting location. It's only one. It's not like drive-through. It's all outside. We have to bring you the machines to you, bring them back inside, bring them out to you. It's a pretty cumbersome project. So we say, please, please, please. We don't check what your disability is. My staff are not doctors, but that's still in place for voters who physically cannot enter a poll. And then I'll just run through 24-hour voting. So again, for folks who have multiple jobs, again, for parents or caregivers who by the time you get to school and get back and make dinner, it was hard to vote from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. law enforcement, medical workers. We had 24-hour voting. We had about 10% of voters in any day who would vote in those back half of the hour, so 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. No longer allowed. Texas legislature has outlawed that. So we're back to just expanded voting to 10 p.m. So for every election, we offer at least one day that's open till 10 p.m. And that seems to be helping some folks. The things we are allowed to keep, though, we've got our new voting machines. I'd love to get into those. We've got voting in the jail for folks who literally are incarcerated and cannot make it out to vote before they've been convicted of anything. We still have a call center that we've implemented that has reduced the mail ballot rejection rates before these last couple of weeks down to less than 1%. And we have a voter registration team, a dedicated 20-person outreach team, never done before in the state, that has increased for the first time ever, increased voter registration in odd year elections. And because of them, we've now surpassed 2.5 million registered voters in Harris County. So those are just the big ones. That's not even the technical things we're doing behind the scene here to make it a little easier, but I'll stop there for any more questions you have.
Yeah, wonderful. And I mean, it's wonderful to hear that more and more people are getting registered to vote, of course. So let's talk a little bit. You mentioned the mail-in ballot. So let's talk a little bit about that. With the new rules from the state legislature on mail-in ballots, how has that affected the voting process, and what changes should somebody be looking for if they're typically somebody who does vote by mail?
Yeah, these are all a direct correlation now from the election laws passed in the fall. Pretty contentious. Senate Bill 1, for those of you following along, was passed in the fall and was implemented December 2nd. So any election ordered before December 2nd was not in effect for these new changes. But the primary is the first election that will have these new Senate Bill 1 law changes. Part of that is this mail ballot additions. Now my office, we used to send out mail ballot applications. Anyone over 65, doesn't matter if you voted for the first time or the 100th time, doesn't matter what party you were, we sent you a mail ballot application. I'm no longer allowed to do that. I'm no longer allowed to talk about mail ballot voting because of an anti-solicitation provision. So to be honest, I'm going to have to be very cautious even about what I'm allowed to say in this meeting, which is an odd situation to be in as an election official. So I can tell you to not vote by mail, but I cannot encourage you to vote by mail if you're eligible to do so. But I can say that for the mail ballot applications and mail ballots now, you will have to add your driver's license or last four digits of your social security number onto your application. We're seeing now folks who, because of identity theft, scares, what we've been taught for years and years and years, don't want to add those numbers on their mail ballot applications. Or if you registered, I like to say 450 years ago, and you put your social security number down, but you never got a driver's license, people are putting, their driver's license number down now on their application, but all we have in their file is their social security number. So they're both legal numbers. They're both good numbers. They're both true numbers, but they don't match up with what we have in our files.
Right.
And so now we have to recheck those mail ballot applications. We are, I believe, last I heard from my staff, we are just for these ID provisions alone rejecting 8% of our mail ballot applications, and we're up to rejecting 30% of our mail ballot applications total, which is triple what we've seen in the past for comparable elections.
Is there any way that somebody can verify what information is on file? Like, could I call and say, can you just verify, do I have my driver's license? Do I have my social security? Is there any way to just verify that ahead of time so you don't get rejected?
Yeah, absolutely. So again, Harris County, we are very thankful and grateful to have a big enough county where we have a call center, like I said, who's been actively calling voters when we get their applications, when we see these numbers are missing. We're calling you if we have your phone number and saying, hey, we're sending you another application. Please get it corrected and please return it by February 18th, which is our mail ballot application deadline. In reverse, you can call us 713-755-6965, which is our general voter line, English, Spanish, Vietnamese, Chinese. Call us and we will absolutely do that. Look up your application. Have we received it? Have we had to flag for rejection? Is it good to go? You're right. I can tell you which ID number you have. So I can tell you if it's a driver's license or social security number. I can't tell you the number. Obviously, we don't be proponents of identity theft, but we can absolutely walk you through every step of the process, how to correct it, and we are also logging for those incidents that are not correctable. I know there's the story out there right now. People are hearing about that World War II veteran who's been voting by mail for years. He's 95. And because of when he registered to vote, he didn't have to put his social security or driver's license number down. So even though he's called, we have to keep rejecting him. His solution is by the end of today, he has to return a voter registration card, an updated one with that information. And so those are some of the loopholes that people are getting trapped in with these new laws.
Okay. Well, thank you for sharing that. And we also had a comment that you can go online to check for that as well. So thank you very much. And that was from our HR's president and CEO, Bob Hale, who's watching this morning. A lot of our staff are watching, and thankful that you were coming on to share this information because, like I said, we've been getting a lot of questions from members. So you mentioned, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll follow up. So on that tracker, absolutely. Thank you, President Hale. You can go on our Harris County tracker and only have one of your ID numbers, and you can find and track that information. I will caution you all, the Secretary of State, because of this new law, had to put up their own mail ballot tracker. In another odd loophole, you have to have both of your numbers, your driver's license and social security number, your address as it is on your voter registration, and your name to enter into their tracker. So even if you only have a social security number, no driver's license, even though that's legal and true, you won't be able to use the state tracker. So that's why we're encouraging you to call us, to use our tracker in Harris County so that we can work you through that system so you're not getting caught in the loophole of what you may or may not have to log on to the state tracker.
Excellent. Thank you. So you mentioned the new voting machines. I want to talk about those a little bit. Actually, I had a colleague who used one for the first time and was telling me about their experience. So tell us, how has that implementation of the new voting machines been? And do you expect any issues as it relates to the new machines in the upcoming election?
It's been pretty good. I will say that the March primary is the first election that I think voters are really going to be paying attention. We've had them for about a year now. They're touchscreen. So for voters who remember you've had to do the wheel and button forever, no longer. It is now a touchscreen machine. What you see is what you get. You can even toggle between languages. You can increase the font size. You can do audio. So many more accessibility features. The big change, though, is you get paper. So when you check in to vote, you get a blank piece of ballot paper. You feed it into essentially this voting machine, make your selections, and it will print out your selections. This is not a receipt. Do not take this home. This is your actual live ballot. Nothing of your vote has been recorded until you take that ballot with all of your selections and turn it into our ballot box. So it's a 3-step process. Check in, vote, and put it in the ballot box. Once you put it in the ballot box is when it's counted and it's secured, but you've got to really, really, really make sure to return that paper into the ballot box. That being said, people love the touchscreen. It's about 3 seconds of getting used to it. But with anything that has paper, we have paper jams. So, be careful putting the paper into one machine and the other. We have plenty of paper. We have been able to think ahead. We are not suffering from any paper shortages for the primary. So if there's, paper jams, don't worry. It's part of the process. We just back it out and give you another one and destroy the one you had before. Pretty easy peasy, but in all fairness, I've been dealing with it for over a year. So I would love to hear from your staff or anyone who has voted on them on just their kind of experiences and what we can do to improve it.
Yeah, wonderful. And if anybody has comments they'd like to make or suggestions about that process, if you've already used the new voting machines, type them into the comments. My colleague that did use them said that they were a little taken back at first because they didn't know what to expect, but that the volunteers that were there on site were so helpful and walked them through the process with ease. So that's wonderful. We have a question coming up about dates. Demetria was saying, what is due today in regard to voter registrations? But I wanted to get all of the dates from you. So what are some important dates to remember for the upcoming primary election?
January 31st, today is the voter registration deadline to have your your voter registration postmarked to us, right, to send to our office 30 days ahead of the March 1st primary. If you postmark it to us today, but you want to go vote early on February 14th, that'll be fine. But you need to have your voter registration in today. February 14th, Valentine's Day, our first day for early voting. Bring a date, bring yourself, date yourself by voting. Come and vote early at any of our 90 locations for early voting. Again, that'll be open 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. every day. Sundays, noon to 7, getting ourselves a little bit of a break. And then February 24th will be the day we have voting expanded to 10 p.m. February 25th, last day to early vote, and March 1st, that big day, voting day, election day for the primaries. February 18th is your deadline to get your mail ballot application in. And then March 1st, we really need your mail ballots postmarked by March 1st and into our office by March 2nd, the very next day. So I know those are quick. They're up on our website. We have a new election calendar function now at harrisvotes.com where you can scroll down on that front page and see all the deadlines coming up for these elections.
Very good. And we had a couple questions coming in that I wanted to talk about in regard to voter registration. Carolyn said, if a voter registration card does not come in the mail, but you are showing registered to vote online, is there a way to get a copy of the voter registration card?
Sure. So every 2 years, we have to send you out new voter registration cards. So I think y'all are seeing that now that we're sending out your voter registration cards. This is a weird quirk in the law. Your voter registration is active continuously. It's only those cards that, for whatever reason, the state of Texas feels we need to send you a new one every 2 years. That expiration date on your voter registration card has no bearing on your voter registration. Okay. You are fine to come vote. Even if you have that card or don't have that card, you do not need that card to come vote. As you stated, Caroline, if you're active in our system for everything else, you're good to vote. So people are getting their voter registration cards, with 2.5 million to send out. We have to send them out in batches. So you'll be getting that, in the next week or two here. But yes, you do not need your voter registration card to vote. It's an antiquated system. It's one of these weird quirks in the law where we still have to send you a card, but you don't need it. You'll be fine to come with another form of ID.
And that actually answered Gloria's question as well. She was asking, does everyone need to re-register? So it sounds like the answer to that is no.
No, I don't know why. I don't like it. I think for this reason, it really scares voters. Again, the registration expiration on your card has nothing to do with your voter registration. You are still, if you're active, if you've kept it updated, right? If you've moved, you do have to update your voter registration. But barring kind of any other change, you are good to vote in this primary election.
Which, as realtors, you and I had a conversation last week, and as realtors, you had made mention that realtors are helping people move all of the time. So this is something that would be a great reminder to people's clients and customers.
We need your help. Please, please, please. One of the biggest issues we face with voter registration is just that people who move, people who don't know that they're in a new congressional district, or especially because of redistricting. Now the state of Texas, we don't have online voter registration. You have to print out that form, or if y'all are able to come pick up voter registration forms and put them in your welcome baskets or any information or packet you have for your clients, it's phenomenal. It gets people thinking about it. However, this is kind of a weird quirk. There's no online voter registration for new voters, but the state of Texas will now allow you that if you are just moving residences, you can go to the Secretary of State website and update your voter registration to reflect that you have moved in Texas. So if you want to even put that note on a card for your clients, right, and say, hey, you can register if you're coming from out of state, or you can go online. That is the number one thing we see. And honestly, it trips people up that they're doing everything right. Maybe they moved 3 months ago or 6 months ago. They're not even close to the deadline, but by the time they go vote, their driver's license is showing a different address. They're testifying to a different address. It is a good reason to have your vote maybe delayed or push you into a provisional ballot for not updating your registration.
Okay, so make sure you do. Rob had a question about how do we get ballots to our kids that are away in college?
Kids who are away at college qualify for mail ballot voting. So absolutely, they can go online and download that mail ballot application. Again, in Texas, there is no online mail ballot application. You have to download it, print it, and send it to us. We're encouraging folks, though the deadline is February 18th. Please, please, please send it now, especially if your kiddos put that wrong ID number down or there's an issue with their signature. We need plenty of time for it to get to us in the mail. and then for us to call them or send it back to them in the mail. We also encourage everyone who's applying to vote by mail, put your phone number down, please, 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 so we can call you. That phone number goes nowhere. It is illegal for me by law to share that phone number with anyone else, even within the government. So I promise you, it is just internally for us to find you, to find your kiddos, and to help them with what their mail ballot situation is.
Wonderful. Okay, a couple of questions are coming in about the change of address. I'll make sure to get to those. But there was a few questions that came in prior to that. Pamela had a little concern, expressing a little bit of concern about the March 2nd deadline. Do you know if there's any steps that the U.S. Postal Service is taking to ensure that you receive that information?
A couple of things we do or have done in our office are mail ballot envelopes. You'll see they have a special, almost looks like an American flag that says official election mail on it. That is flagged in the U.S. Postal Service system and kicked out and prioritized from the very beginning. So as long as you're using our mail ballot envelopes, it is prioritizing the election mail to get back to us. We go and pick up the mail, I believe, 4 times a day from the post office. And at these evening deadlines where we know it matters to have it postmarked by a certain time, and it matters to have it in our office by a certain time, we have someone stationed at the post office. We don't even wait for them to bring it to us. At the post office, getting every last piece of mail they can up to the very last second to then bring it back to our office and process. So other than that, I can't speak to the U.S. Postal Service, what they're doing internally, but that's what we try and do on our side.
You guys are doing a lot, so that's wonderful. Okay, a couple other questions that we had. So there was 2 questions. Noelle was saying, so if someone just bought a house, they need to update their registration or re-register, and also what is the website? And then Karen, kind of a follow-up to that, was asking, if you do need to do a change of address, does that need to be done by today?
Change of address, does it need to be done by today? Change of address needs to be done by today if you want to vote from your new residence, yes. Because it's essentially the same as, let's call it all voter registration that is applicable to the March primary needs to be done by today if you want to be eligible to vote in the March primary. And the first question of online, if you go to the Secretary of State website, forget what it is, I think it's sos.tx.gov, something to that effect. They'll have the new voter registration updating database on there. Yes, same thing. Need to go through and update it today. And that is if you're moving within Texas, and especially if you're moving within Harris County. That should be the fastest and easiest way for anyone to update their registration. But if you're moving from out of state, you only have the paper form to rely on to download and get in the mail to us today.
Okay, excellent. A few more questions here, and then I'll get back to some of the questions I had for you as well. There was a question. Oh, we did answer that one. Demetria said, since several places have been shut down, will we be notified where to go to vote?
Absolutely. So in the next week or two, we're finalizing all of those 90 early vote locations. So some of them, from November 2020 aren't available. Some of them are shut down, as y'all said, due to construction. But we're working with most of our community centers to open back up. So we'll have that update. Probably look out for something by the end of the week. And then on Election Day, it'll be 375 locations. I will take this opportunity to say, because it's a primary, and in Texas, it's a split primary, which means that when you walk into a voting location, the Democrats and Republicans prefer that instead of checking in at one table like you do on early vote, on Election Day, you'll have to pick which line you want to be in, Democrat or Republican. In Texas, we're an open primary, which means that anyone gets to decide which primary they want to vote in. I will remind folks, though, that whatever you vote in for the primary, that is what you have to vote in for the runoff. So sometimes we have folks that say, well, I want to vote in the Republican primary, and then in the runoff, I want to switch to the Democratic runoff because those are interesting races and I'm an independent. It doesn't work like that. Whatever you pick for the first one is what you got to pick for the runoff.
Okay, very good. Think we had, yes, so Alex was asking, and we're going to talk a little bit more about how realtors can get involved a little bit later, but Alex was just asking, are the volunteer deputy voter registrar classes going to be available again?
Yeah, they're ongoing. They're online right now. Those are the ones that we haven't been able to offer in person, but we offer
Hmm.
several online classes per week. We have over 4,000 deputy voter registrars now in Harris County, which is pretty phenomenal. And then on top of that, that 20-person outreach team, their job is not only to go out and register voters, but y'all might remember in the past, you were VDVR. So that means you can fill out those forms, especially for your clients. You can turn those forms back into us so they don't have to worry about mailing them. Now we also connect you to other community events going on and say, hey, if you're a VDVR and you live in this neighborhood, can you come out and register voters at the Fall Festival, at the Lunar New Year Festival? That's what we were at. So we're not only just doing it individually, but connecting the dots. But yeah, 4,000 VDVRs and counting. You can go on harrisvotes.com and see those classes to update.
Okay, very good. So I had a question about how you tabulate those election results. What is the process of tabulating the results, and why does it sometimes take longer than people would expect to calculate them and release them to the public?
Oh boy. Okay. Hold me accountable because I could talk for hours about this. So I'll try and do the short version. The fastest way to say it is that all of the results are unofficial until they're canvassed. So, canvassing means that a week or sometimes 2 weeks, depending on the timelines for each election, a week after every election, excuse me, voters have, for example, your military voters, your overseas voters have 1 week extra to turn in their mail ballots because international mail takes longer to process.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to wait an extra week for those mail ballots to come in. For anyone who's got a provisional ballot and had an ID issue and needs to come to our office, they have 1 week to come to our office. So on election night, you get everything from early voting. We work every single day to get those early vote results tabulated. Um, and then on election night, it's not instantaneous. So on election night at 7 p.m., you get everything from early voting and mail ballot voting. But then we have to wait for the polls to close at 7 p.m. and those election judges to safely and securely shut down their polls, get every voter out of line and processed, do all the paperwork, seal up the ballots so they can be transported. And that takes, if you're really lucky, 30 minutes as a judge. If you've got a slow poll and a small poll, if you have thousands of pieces, literally of provisional ballots to process and hundreds of machines to close down, et cetera, that could take you up to an hour, hour and a half. And so that's what we see on election night is those faster judges who come in. That's when you see us put the results out, at 8 o'clock. So if they shut down in 30 minutes and then it's 15 minutes to drive to our office and then it's 15 minutes for us to, get that hardware, process it, make sure it hasn't been corrupted, and tabulate those results. The first time you're seeing a result for any election, big or small, is 8 p.m. for election day. And then you have the week later where we have to, again, wait for all of that. And then it gets tabulated in. And then we have a bipartisan committee of Democrats and Republicans who certify the results, who read the results, who make sure there's no discrepancy in the numbers or anything like that. And then we certify the results. So 1 week later, you have the official results. It's really important to realize what is an unofficial on election night versus the official certification 1 week later. Sometimes you see, on election night, there's dozens of folks, why do you have more check-ins and votes, et cetera. That takes us a week to go back and see what were the issues, what happened, was this really a provisional ballot? And so what you should be looking for is those official election results, those 1 to 2 weeks later, when we can just comb through and really make sure that data is good.
So there was something that you and I discussed last week that I found really interesting, and that was the voting locations and how those are determined. So can you tell us a little bit about that? And is there a way that realtors can get involved in that process?
Absolutely. So our voting locations are determined by an average number of registered voters per voting location. So for early voting, with all of our 2.5 million registered voters, what we figured out is 90 is our special number. 90 early vote locations, services about, I can't remember what it is off the top of my head, but somewhere around kind of 10,000 voters each, almost, probably more than that. Someone will do the math here, I'm sure, and check me. That is also geographic, right? That there's a certain driving distance that we try and get. We try and make sure that voting locations are spaced out enough that they're not so crowded in, right? That you could walk to one or the other. For election day, they are within walking distance of neighborhoods. But for early voting, we think you're more likely to be able to access some kind of other transportation. That being said, there's parts of town that we know have had money in development for many years that have great community centers, and there's parts of towns that don't. Where we struggle to find voting locations is in our historically Black neighborhoods where there was an underinvestment, right, in development. Y'all know this probably from your housing stock as well. There are not large community centers. And if there's a large community center, it is the COVID site, it's the tax site, it's the senior center, it's the early child. There's so many functions going on there that they literally may not have room to squeeze in voting. So we see often a detriment there in space. So if you all have commercial spaces, we pay to rent for early voting and election day. If you have commercial spaces in some of these areas that is being underutilized right now, that does have at least electricity and a working bathroom, we're happy to use it. Interestingly, the other space where we don't have voting locations as easily is in our new developments. So if you look in the Northwest where you have beautiful new homes in these planned subdivisions, very rarely do these planned subdivisions put community centers in them, or at least community centers that are large enough to host voting. So I'm thinking in our Klein area, in our Spring area, kind of even closer northwest to Hockley and all of that, not many big community centers there. It's usually the high schools that are the centers of engagement. But again, if you have a high school, they have a gym or maybe a cafeteria, you have students in that cafeteria, you have sports going on in that gym. So that is where we also find a kind of a detriment of voting locations. So if you know of churches, if you know of commercial spaces, heck, if you know of spaces that you've always thought, why is that not a voting location? Send that to me. We have a whole team that researches locations and is looking every election for someplace new that we can use.
Wonderful. What are some other ways that realtors can get involved in the election process?
Register voters, become a VDVR so you can register them yourselves. Remind voters, as your clients, right, as they're getting to that home, don't wait until later. Update that voter registration online, get that voter registration form into us. I know it's one of those tedious things that people like to hold off until later, but then you're here at the deadline and wondering where that form is or how you can register to vote. So being on the lookout for locations. Also, if you've got some new voters right now, if you can print out online, I think it's always cute to give voters something to put up on their fridge with all the upcoming election dates for the year, not just the primary, but we've got 2 countywide elections in May and then the gubernatorial election coming up in November. Just always helps people get used to kind of voting happening in their area.
Very good. Shamina made a comment here. She said that as a real estate broker, she's always so excited to work during early voting and election day. So thank you for that.
Wonderful. You're one of our election clerks or election judges. That's another way that maybe is not tied necessarily to your work, but it's a great opportunity to meet people in the neighborhood, to get your face out there. And if you have the time, especially with your flexible schedules on election day, it's a 12 to 15 hour day, but we're always looking for folks who are passionate to help us on election day.
Very good. So where can Harris County residents go to find answers to all of their election related questions?
harrisvotes.com, harrisvotes.org, whatever it is, both work, harrisvotes.com or harrisvotes.org. We've got it all there. We've got the election dates, the hours, the locations, the voter registration forms, information related to redistricting. It's a little bit of a tedious website right now. We're going through a redesign that'll come out hopefully in a couple of weeks, but it's got all your information. And most importantly, 713-755-6965 is our voter phone number for all your questions by phone.
Okay, very good. Now, what about we've been talking about Harris County, obviously, but what about for non-Harris County residents? Where can they go to get election information in their areas?
Each of your counties should have an election office, either an elections administrator or county clerk. But when in doubt, go to that Secretary of State website. They usually have good information on, again, those election dates coming up, on where to register to vote, those quick links. And then they can also direct you to what county you live in, if you don't know already, and how to access those county resources.
Very good. Are there any other frequently asked questions that you've received that we haven't covered yet this morning?
Just what you need to go vote. In Texas, we are a voter ID state, so don't forget. Most frequent is that driver's license, but passports work as well. There's another list of all the forms of ID that work online. Some go out and check it. If you don't have a driver's license, Texas, I think it's a Texas ID or a passport, which are most common uses. Go and check online for the military IDs or other IDs you can use to vote, or you can bring that voter registration card. So when in doubt, you can bring that. But also a reminder to everyone, you can vote anywhere in Harris County now. Used to be on election day, you could only vote in your neighborhood or precinct. It hasn't been that way for a couple of years. Early vote, election day, you can vote at any single voting site from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m.
Wonderful. Well, thank you again for all of this information you've shared with us. I know it's truly helpful. Our members are thanking you in the comments. So we really appreciate it. So that's it for this Member Focus Monday. We will be back next Monday at 9 a.m. with Dr. Stephen Kleinberg with the Kinder Institute of Urban Development and Research. He's going to be discussing the future of Houston and Harris County and surrounding areas. So be sure to tune in for that one. Have a great week, everyone. Bye-bye.